The next Sif in Shulchan Aruch, Pei Zayin, deals with the issue of Maris Ayin, a very, very important question of what you're not allowed to do, what's permitted to do, but you're not allowed to do it because it's going to give the wrong impression. That's what Maris Ayin is. And it comes up a lot today, but I think less today than it did 20 years ago. So for instance, you eat parve ice cream for dessert after a fleishik meal. Maris Ayin or not Maris Ayin. So growing up, lo zachinu to parve ice cream that looked anything like ice cream. So today, the tofuti things and things like that, so it looks better than the milchik stuff. So poskim say no Maris Ayin. But the question still, et cetera. What the Rema talks about is coffee creamer. What he talks about is if you're allowed to take almond milk and put it into your coffee or drink it with the fleishik meal one way or the other, and the Rema says you're not. And he says you have to, you can do it, but you'll have to put little pieces of the almond shell near the either in the milk or next to the milk, and then you can do it. But otherwise, it's Maris Ayin. Today there's coffee creamer, which the poskim say everybody knows is parve. So today the poskim say, talking about Rav Moshe, Rabbi Yaacov, they say you're allowed to be at a fleishik wedding in public with everyone and have a glass of milk with your steak. You're allowed to do that because there's no Maris Ayin. So now the question comes up often does come up today, is there are many business meetings, etc., or even personal vacation spots which entail going into a treif restaurant. And this is the question I hear most often. You go into a treif restaurant, you're not doing anything. You're having a Diet Coke, but everybody around you is eating lobsters and shrimp or treif, or it's a treif restaurant, whatever they're eating. Are you allowed to be there? So is that Maris Ayin? I think it is Maris Ayin, but I just want to go back and explain how the whole thing works. The Gemara says, in Krisus and a few places, the Gemara begins with the pasuk, which is coming up, of V'yisem nekiyim meiHashem Yisrael. The oraisa that a person is chayev, lotzei sidei habriyos, that's one lashon of the Gemara, lotzei sidei habriyos, like you have with Moshe, the Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain, whether you have to be yod, like it doesn't look right. That's one thing. On another place, the Gemara says, "Kol davar she'asru chachamim mishum Maris Ayin." Rav says, "Gam b'chadrei chadarim asur shenemar v'yisa nekiyim meiHashem Yisrael." But that seems to be the working pasuk. The Chasam Sofer says, I don't even know if we need a pasuk. It should be obvious, but there is a pasuk that even if you're doing the right thing, this is what the pasuk is telling you. Even if you're doing the right thing, you know it's the right thing, you know in your heart it's the right thing, but it looks like you're doing the wrong thing, so you're not allowed to do it. Possibly an Isser Deraisa, you're over at Essay Deraisa. The Yisam Nekiyim meiHashem Yisrael. Chasam Sofer, by the way, writes, I just saw quoted yesterday, the Chasam Sofer writes in one of his shuvas, he says that there are things that you have to not refrain from, let's say, because they're wrong. And there are things that you have to refrain from because they look bad. So some ciphers that I want to say two things. First of all, it's much more difficult to worry about what other people think than to worry about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's much more complicated. And if one violates HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's one level of onesh lo aleinu. But if you do something which looks bad, it's a much more serious onesh. So says the Chasam Sofer. It's much more difficult. And it's much more serious. Why is it much more serious to do a lifneiver if you're doing the right thing? Because you're teaching others to do the wrong thing. And once you're teaching others to do the wrong thing by your example, or other pshatim, not the Chasam Sofer, but others say, even b'chadrei chadarm, even for yourself, you're creating an anhaga which is wrong. Ad kadei kach. But the Chasam Sofer says it's actually a worse thing. I want to go into it tomorrow with a very practical thing. We're just going to say a couple of things that the Gemara says. The Gemara says there's a couple of things that you're not allowed to, if you, let's say your clothes get wet. So Gemara, let's say you come in from the rain, your clothes are wet. Are you allowed to hang them on the line on Shabbos? So it's a Gemara. So if you would be laundering them, you're not laundering them, but if you would be laundering them, it would be an Isser Deraisa. So now you're putting on the line, so the neighbors figure you're laundering it. So therefore, the Gemara says, Usser, because of Maris Ayin, and you're allowed to do it deep in your house. So some cases you see you're allowed to do it deep in your house, but you're not allowed to do it Klape Ha'am. So says the Gemara. That's one example. Another example the Gemara gives in Avodah Zarah is if you're thirsty and there's a spring, like a fountain for Avodah Zarah with a big getchka in the middle. So common, you see it often in America. I don't think there are any here. You throw a penny. So throwing the penny for sure is a meiSav Avodah Zarah. But if you bend down to drink from that water, so the Gemara says Mefurish, it's near a Kamishtachav Avodah Zarah, and you're over Isser Deraisa for that. If they have different, the Gemara says, different getchkas that have like a pipe with water coming in, you're thirsty, so you look like you drink from the pipe. I'm not bowing down at all. So nira kimenashek la'avodah zarah. So you have to take all of these things and try to know if and how it applies. The Gemara says that if you own a merchatz, if you own a spa or old time merchatz, so you're not allowed to have it open even if you're not doing anything with it, just has your name on it. Why? Maris Ayin. So that's something that's usher. But that doesn't, and here's where I want to make this one point, doesn't necessarily mean that applies to every business that says the name Goldstein on it. That's not necessarily true. Why? Because Maris Ayin, this is my one klal for today, Maris Ayin is, according to most Rishonim, only an Isser when what they're being choshesh for is a deraisa. Rema says that. But if it's derabanan, then in other words, what do you think I'm doing? So I'm doing a derabanan. So if I'm doing a derabanan, there's no Maris Ayin. Why there's no Maris Ayin is maybe because it's two derabanans. Why it's Maris Ayin is but there's no Maris Ayin on droma, just like there's no lifnei iver loisitin michshol on a derabanan. There might be Messiah, there's no lifnei iver on a derabanan. There's also no Maris Ayin on a derabanan. So here's the thing. I believe this is true. The Gemara's example of you have a merchatz open. A merchatz requires heating water, tons of deraisas. But let's say you have a business that doesn't have any malachas involved with it. What's going on? It's drabanan, meaning you're not allowed to do mekach, money is muksa, all those things completely off, completely wrong. But is there a Maris Ayin in the store being open? These are sheitel for big gedolim, not for me. I'm just presenting the issue. So Maris Ayin becomes, and you can think of them yourself, hotels, Starbucks, 7-Elevens, Dunkin' Donuts. I could list you of all the averes that I've been nichshulin over the years of having a cup of coffee at a treif place, let's say. So all these things are a question of Maris Ayin, and all of them need to be paskind, and hence the poskim are full of this shayla. I want to tie up the inyan of Maris Ayin. I've been talking about it for a couple of days with just two quick points. And it's a big sugya, and no way in this morning I can cover the sugya, but just a couple of points to make it, bring it to the front of our minds. Number one, I asked a question yesterday, V'yisam nekiyim meiHashem u'meYisrael. So you're not allowed to do something which doesn't look right, mipnei chashad. So Bishleima v'yisam nekiyim meiYisrael, you're not allowed to do something which doesn't look right, for one of two reasons, either Maris Ayin or because somebody's going to think I'm doing an Aver. What does v'yisam nekiyim meiHashem mean? Hashem knows what I'm doing and what I'm not doing. What does what does it even mean? The word Chashad, it doesn't apply to Hashem, right? I mean, Hashem can't be Choshed me for that cheeseburger. It might be real burger or real cheese. How does Hashem Choshed us? And it's interesting, Rashi doesn't explain, nobody on the block there in the Mikrois Gedolos explain what that meiHashem is for. But I found a Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, V'yisam nekiyim meiHashem meYisrael, it means that don't make a Chillul Hashem. V'yisam nekiyim meiHashem meYisrael, don't make a Chillul Hashem. Meaning that if it looks to people around, even Goyim, that you're not doing the Ratzon Hashem, So now that's a Chillul Hashem. Like it's supposed to look like, wow, Jews are all keeping the Ratzon Hashem and leading the way for the whole world to do the Ratzon Hashem. So that's v'yisem nekiyim meiHashem u'meYisrael. In Rav Moshe finds in the Igros Moshe, which he speaks a lot about this in at least 6 places that I found. He speaks in the Mafteach of the Igros Moshe. It seems like on the surface a contradiction in what he says. I'll tell you what the contradiction is. When it comes to, he talks a lot about, remember his era in the 60s, he talks a lot about the prohibition of walking into a shul without a mechitzah. That's one of the topics Rav Moshe taught the United States, the Orthodoxy of United States of America. You need a mechitzah, and you're not allowed to even walk into a place. I don't know if Europe, they made places without mechitzahs, Orthodox places anyway, without a mechitzah. I don't think there was a conservative movement per se. But he was very adamant, and he was more adamant about Orthodox shuls that took off their mechitzah, which you saw a lot of when I was a child. It was more strict about that than conservative shuls, which l'chatchila didn't have a mechitzah, or reform shuls, so temples, mela. But he was very makpid on it, and he said he compared it to a base avodah zara. Is that afilu nachash ratzach harav la'achishay, even if there would be a snake chasing you, you're not allowed to walk in there. The same as like a base avodah zara. So therefore he says halacha l'maisa, that you're not allowed to. Let's say you're going in and you're not going into the sanctuary, or you're making even another minyan there, and all kinds of reasons why you would go in. He says you're not allowed to go in because of v'yisem nekiyim meiHashem Yisrael. Nobody should think you went in there to daven. I'm not going to daven chas v'shalom. I'm just going in to use the telephone or whatever it is that you're. I guess nachash ratzach harav la'achisha is our case with sirens. So you can't go in. So he's very strict about this. On the other hand, there's another 2 tshuvos of Rav Moshe where he asks why a sheitel is not Maris Ayin, or is a sheitel Maris Ayin in question form. Sheitel, married women are supposed to cover their hair. So if they cover their hair with a sheitel, so it looks like they're not covering their hair, even though they are covering their hair. Why isn't that a classic case of Maris Ayin? And there he says, and I'm sure there's a lot of history to what the Rabbanim were matir at that time. I'm not going into that right now. But what he does say, la halacha, is the following. He says 2 things. He says, number one, it's for a woman to go outside with her hair uncovered, she's not over a lav. She's over an isser essay, an isser essay. And he gives a number of isser essays that are possible here. You don't have Maris Ayin on an isser essay. Number 2, you don't have Maris Ayin where everybody could tell that it's a sheitel. In other words, you'll ask people, is that her hair? Is that a sheitel? So ask your wife. He says they'll know it's a sheitel, and therefore it becomes a veggie burger, and it becomes okay. So even if you'll say it's a lav, or you'll say Maris Ayin on an isser asay, so it's still not usher, because any time, that's the Rema says with the almond milk, anytime other people know, so then it's not Maris Ayin. That second reason is you have to look at this because the technology of sheitels have changed a lot over the last 50 years. There's been a lot of changes, and I'm not so sure everybody can tell. A and B, the Talmidim of Rav Moshe, like Reb David Feinstein, pointed out that that's talking about if you're in a neighborhood that everybody can tell. But let's say you go to Midtown Manhattan or Tel Aviv or something, and they can't necessarily tell that, that's a lace. So some of the places can say, just very interesting, counterintuitive, if you will. Because that's where you want to wear that kind of sheitel, but they say that it's not so pashut because they can't tell. To them, that maybe they know women are supposed to cover their hair. They say, oh, that Orthodox lady doesn't cover her hair. So what I'm saying is a possibility of a chumrah. What's up with not walking into a non-kosher shul? Why is that more machmir than a sheitel? I think the answer is, even though he doesn't say these words, one's a Maris Ayin, one's a Chashad. Maris Ayin, it has to be a lav deraisa. It has to be something that nobody else can tell. Those are hilchos Maris Ayin, as I explained yesterday. Hilchas Chashad is a different thing. That's more like the V'yisem nekiyim meiHashem. That the Chashad is that people, or even Hashem, will see a zilzul here in a particular mitzvah. That's not Maris Ayin. It has nothing to do with other people learning from me. It has nothing to do with what. It has to do with people are going to see that I'm not keeping Torah. And that's a Chillul Hashem. Oh, people don't keep Torah anymore. That's a Chillul Hashem. That's Chashad. And Chashad is deraisa. So since it's deraisa, they have to be much more machmer. I think that's the difference.